Hi, I'm John F. Allen.
And I'm R.J. Sullivan.
And we're the Two Towers.
This is episode 8 of the Two Towers Talk Show, part 1 of a 2-part series.
Greetings and welcome to the Two Towers Talk Show. I'm your host, John F. Allen, Tower 1.
And I'm R.J. Sullivan, Tower 2.
Today we're going to be discussing and reviewing Castlevania. We're talking about the Netflix series, which premiered on July 7th of 2017 and has been renewed and expanded for a second and third season and has been greenlit for a fourth season. So we're going to be discussing seasons 1 through 3 and what goes on. Just to give you a little background about the show itself, it's an American adult animated web television series. It's based on a Japanese video game series by Konami. Now, this follows a vampire hunter, and actually it becomes a group of vampire hunters who are fighting to save a besieged city from an army of otherworldly creatures, mostly vampires and demons as such, controlled by none other than Dracula. So, yes.
Oh, yeah.
So, Dracula is a fan favorite character for both RJ and myself. So we'll have a lot to say about that. I also want to give shout outs to the creator of Castlevania, who is Warren Ellis. He's a British comic book writer and novelist and screenwriter. You may know him from some of the comic series he produced, such as Transmetropolitan, Global Frequency, and just so you know, Red, the comic series graphic novel that he created, was the basis for the films Red and Red 2, which starred Bruce Willis, Morgan Freeman, Helen Mirren, and John Malkovich, to name a few. So, that being said, we want to give our shout outs to Warren Ellis. He did a fine job in creating this character. And we will also have some trivia with regards to the video games and how this all ties into the video games and the video games that are currently out from the Castlevania series. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So let me just take this moment to talk about some of the actors and characters in the show, and then we'll dive into it. First off, we've got Graham McTavish, who you may recognize as a character from the Lord of the Rings live action movie series. He is lending his voice talents to Dracula. And we have Emily Swallow as Lisa Tepish, who plays his wife, his human wife. We have Richard Armitage, who you may know as Thorin from the series for the Lord of the Rings. So we've got that. He's playing Trevor Belmont. We've got Alejandra Reynoso as Saifa Bellinadis. She's like a speaker magician. She's basically a sorceress. James Callis, who plays Alucard. Yeah, write out Alucard, Alucard, and put it in front of a mirror, folks. Kids, you'll love this. Anyway.
You have to be a kid to appreciate it.
Yes. It wears off. Anyway, we've also got, for you old heads out there and for some of you new heads who might want to research this, we've got Matt Frewer, who is lending his voice talents to the Bishop. And so the Bishop character appears in the first season, in the first few episodes, as a matter of fact, and he is voiced by Matt Frewer, who I just said. Now, Matt Frewer may not mean anything to certain people, but to RJ, myself, and other people who are of our age, there was a character back in the day. It was in the height of the MTV days and all that kind of good, wonderful, marvelous stuff, where videos were very popular. They were new. They were fresh. And this character's name was Max Headroom. Max Headroom, yes. So any of you out there who are viewing our show who are familiar with Max Headroom, Matt Frewer was the voice for Max Headroom, and he was also the face model for Max Headroom too. A lot of people don't know.
And for those who are younger or maybe followed Orphan Black, he had a huge part in that in the first couple seasons. He was one of my favorite characters from from Orphan Black. I'm here kicking myself when you tell me that, because I watched the show and did not pick up that that's who that voice was, and I should have. So that's a neat bit of trivia, John.
Yeah, I thought so too, and it took me back to the days of yesteryear, being a young teen and watching this show and finding the humor in it. And Max Headroom was around for a bunch of commercials and everything, so he was all over the place at one time.
He actually had a TV series that was not half bad.
Right, that was kind of what I was referring to,
yeah.
the TV show. But he also did the character did commercials. I think it was for Coke. Or, yep, yeah. So he was all over the place, and he was just a phenomenon. It was basically like a digital talking head with sunglasses. That's pretty much what he was. And he talked funny, like Max Headroom, and it was just that kind of thing. It was goofy. It was fun. It was cutting edge at the time. You kids are going to look at it like, this is some retro shit, really, But it is. And older folks like us have fun remembering days of yesteryear. Anyway, so now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, let's dive in. So, Castlevania. Kids, let me tell you, this TV series is freaking awesome. I mean, it is like one of the best animated anime series that Netflix has ever produced. And it is one of my top 10 of anime of all time, just to put this into perspective. It is very well written. It is very well acted. It is very well illustrated, and the action scenes and everything just flow. The cinematography with regards to the animated cells, how this all comes together, the lore, and the tie-in to the video game series is primo. I cannot recommend this show enough. Just if you haven't seen it, go out and click into log into Netflix and watch it, and you will not be disappointed.
Okay, well, that's quite a recommendation, John. I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle. I am very much a lifelong Dracula fan, and it's been a rough several years for Dracula. As much as he's been around, as often as he's been adapted, it's so rarely done well. And I absolutely agree with John. This was like falling headfirst into a pool after being out in the blazing desert for probably 20 years or so. I mean, Dracula's been abused. He's been misused. He's been done so poorly. As many times as he's been done, and
live action Netflix.
Don't get me started.
Avoid that one, kids. Avoid the live action Dracula on Netflix. Do yourself a favor, because after you won't get 5 minutes into it before you're beating your head against the wall, slamming it into the car door. Don't do it.
I'm trying to be kind.
Yeah.
There are people who listen to this who are huge Stephen Moffat fans, and they know that I dislike Stephen Moffat, and the Dracula miniseries just gave me more reason to dislike Stephen Moffat. I was trying to be kind, but damn it, it's bad. I'm sorry, it's bad. It's just bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got one more thing to say, RJ. If you want, if in lieu of watching the live action Dracula Netflix series, watch Castlevania, get your Dracula fix. And if you have to have a live action adaptation, okay, we're going to scrape the bottom of the barrel here. And I'm not saying that to say that I disliked the film, but go out and watch Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mean, you'll get you'll at least be entertained Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But the one, the Netflix, no, don't.
It's better. Oh, well, right. It's better than than the Stephen Moffat Dracula for sure.
Yes,
I'm
that's
not a big
what I'm saying. Scraping the bottom of the barrel there. Yeah, don't.
All right, so about Dracula.
Yes.
He's so rarely done well, and I will call out some things that have done it well, one of which John and I strongly agree on is the Marvel Comics books of the 70s.
Tomb of Dracula.
So very well done. I think, oh my gosh, let's see. Francis Ford Coppola, I'm not a fan of that one. Dracula Untold was kind of close. Not quite there for me. I appreciated the effort. There was a god-awful TV series on NBC a few years ago that was really awful.
And even that's better than the Netflix version.
True. There's been some straight-to-video movies. There's all kinds of stuff out there. So little of it is good. So little of it is well done. I did not care for Van Helsing either. The Stephen Sumner, whoever that guy was. Not a fan of his stuff. The Mummy movies were okay. Van Helsing, not so much. The point is I come into Dracula with a chip on my shoulder. I feel that there are certain things that need to be done, and they need to do it right. And Castlevania checked off all my boxes.
That was Richard Roxburgh who portrayed Dracula in the Van Helsing film. And yes,
well, I just everything about that.
Yes, kids, it was horrible.
It was so good.
Okay, Hugh Jackman, who I'm a big fan of in his action films, could not save this movie, and neither could the beautiful and wondrous Kate Beckinsale. I mean, if Kate Beckinsale can't save the movie by just looking at her, it's really bad. And I'm not saying that I didn't watch it, and I'm not saying that I didn't buy it for $2.99, but it tried and it failed, and
yeah. There's so much that people get wrong about Dracula. I think one of the biggest problems is when they make it about Dracula and they either ignore the folks who are supposed to be the protagonists, or they turn them into flat and uninteresting characters, because Dracula should be opposing the main characters. He should not be the main character.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say you can't check in on Dracula and Dracula shouldn't be motivated and he shouldn't have a plan. But I think when you make it about Dracula, you're kind of missing the point. And One of the things they did very, very well here in Castlevania was make it about our group of protagonists. We checked in with the bad guys. We checked in with them frequently. They had a plan. We understood what Dracula was about. We understood his motivation. But that's all you should do. Just enough to understand who we're up against. But most of the time, it should be about the people fighting him. And when I say an interesting group of characters, this was an extremely interesting group of characters.
And they had a very steeped mythology to them too. I mean, you don't miss a beat with their backstory. Their backstory. Let's put it this way, and you tell me if you agree, RJ.
Mm-hmm.
I could watch a show that had the vampire hunters as individuals. I mean, if they did a mini series with Trevor Belmont or Silpha, I would watch that because their backstories are interesting, so interesting that I could watch that in outside of this series.
Yeah, and that's what you want. Dracula has his minions. He has several minions. There were 4 not really vampire brides. That's not quite fair, but there were 4 lady vampires. You'll know them when you see them. They were all interesting individual characters. They also worked kind of as a team. There were 2 human minions who I think were my favorite characters.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they didn't get a whole lot of screen time, they got a decent amount of screen time. Their stories were very well done. The previously mentioned son of Dracula, Alucard, once I got past that they went with that name. He's actually a very well created character. He's fascinating, and he has a lot of layers to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they handled him very well. I like the way they. And then the last thing that I want to get into, as far as my expectations coming into the Dracula myth, establish which Dracula are we fighting. Are we fighting Christopher Lee, who just runs around in a cape and pretty much has a zillion weaknesses and he can be dispatched with a stake and a hammer? Is that who we're fighting? Are we fighting the Bela Lugosi Dracula that can kind of do some things with a mist and turn into a bat and do some mystical things, but still not very powerful? Are we doing Frank Langella? Or are we doing Marvel's Dracula, who had all the powers from all the legends, therefore making him an incredibly formidable foe, which was, I think, by necessity because they were doing an ongoing comic book series, so he had to be very powerful.
And he was integrated with Marvel superhero comic book characters, so he had to be powerful, yes.
And so they come in Castlevania. We know we are fighting a very powerful Dracula that has considerable forces, and he's also a little unhinged, and his motivations are somewhat questionable. They set all that up very quickly so that we know who we're dealing with, what the stakes are, no pun intended, and what the goals are for our main characters, how they have to kind of get together and join forces, and exactly what they're going to be up against. And I'm just sitting here going, check, 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 check. That's exactly right. That's exactly what they needed to do. And so I would say, there 3 episodes in season 1?
That I'm not certain of. Let me go back.
I've got that up here somewhere. But anyway, 3 or 4 episodes of season 1. I was totally on board. I'd say by the 3rd episode. There's 4. Okay. Season 2 looks like there's another 6 or 7, and then season 3 is 10 episodes. My only negative with the entire series has to do with season 3 and the length of season 3. I thought 10 episodes was a lot. Got a little impatient with it because there's so much setting up in the first several episodes. However, even though I was getting impatient with it, I was still engaged and I was still liking it, and I was anxious to see where it was going, and then it does actually pay off. So it's worth the sitting through. I would have liked for it to have been just a little bit tighter, but once you get to the end, it delivers. So ultimately, it was worth it. And I certainly can't hold that much against it. It's still getting. I'll just jump to that. It's getting 4.5 from me. It's getting practically my highest recommendation. And the only reason it's not, besides the season 3 quibble, is that it's still kind of a work in progress, and I wanna see where it's going. But my goodness, coming in as jaded as I was, I was expecting, okay, this will be okay. It won't be great, but it so far exceeded my expectations as someone who feels like there are so many people who don't get the Dracula myth and don't understand it. And I was really, especially after the Stephen Moffat show, I'm like, do people just not understand? Is it just me? Have I reached a point, kind of like I feel with Star Trek sometimes, that just time has passed me by and people don't get Dracula anymore? But this show really made me feel like, yes, this is it. There are other people out there that get it and can do it right. And the fact that it's based off of a video game is just more amazing to me, because it's not a source where I would have expected deep storytelling, and yet there it is. So I'll leave it at that for now, John. What else have you got?
Well, just to piggyback on what you were saying with regards to this series. Right now on IMDb, it's sitting at 8.2 out of 10, 33,592 reviews. It's not just hype for me and RJ with regards to this series. It's backed up by the people who see it, and they did a tremendous job with it. I want to go back to what RJ was talking about as far as Dracula and being an antagonist, and how good Dracula stories focus on the protagonist and leave Dracula kind of like in the background. And there's a reason for that. Most people know the Dracula mythos, and the history behind Dracula is a lot more interesting than him as a vampire, to me at least, because it's steeped in legend, and this is something that's real. So I'm not saying that vampires exist. What I'm saying is that it's based off historical. The Dracula as a character is based off a historical character who actually did exist. It was very ruthless and very bloodlusty when it came to fighting his enemies. And so sometimes, folks, when it comes to storytelling, you can't beat history as something to base your characters on, because the stuff that's actually happened in this world, whether it be stretching the outer limits of fringe science and reality or whatever to the very dominant historical facts, is something that you can't go wrong with it. It's right there. And as a writer who uses a lot of history, I have to say that is something that always interested me in the Dracula character. And I want to talk about Marvel's version of Dracula and how that ties into this particular version. In the Tomb of Dracula, which was a Marvel comic book series that was published way back in the 70s, this series was... Horror comics was nothing new, okay? Horror comics had been around since like the 40s and 50s and through the 60s, before people thought that it was destroying the youth of America. Yeah, read up on it. It actually happened. In 1972, The Tomb of Dracula #1 debuted with Marvel Comics. And Marvel was revitalizing monster comics, and they started with the best, and that was Dracula. And their telling of Dracula basically focused on the vampire hunters, the people who were his victims, the people in the village of Transylvania, and how they reacted to him and the mythology of him. But you saw him just enough to know what his motivations were, so you knew what the story was. But the real story was with the people who were hunting him and the people who were his victims. And that is the strength in the storytelling when you're dealing with a character like this. And the very powerful version in this series is very akin to the Dracula from the Marvel Comics run, and that he was an elemental force, so to speak. There was a comic book out, it was issue of Thor back in the 80s that had Thor fighting Dracula, and they were vying over control of the weather. One was standing on one building, the other standing on the other, and the weather was confused as to which one to obey. So that's giving you any indication with regards to this. And they were fighting over Lady Sif. And so, because Dracula wanted her to be his bride, and Thor was having none of that. And Thor was like, you foul creature, I am a god. And, in the end, Dracula got to SmackDown. We all know that was going to happen. So it's no spoiler there. But my point is that when it comes to the storytelling with this particular character, they handled it very well. They made him an elemental force, but they focused on the protagonist and the vampire hunters. And boy, did they do a good job of actually making these characters people that you're interested in learning more about and interested in seeing how things develop with these characters. And as I said before, I would watch a show that just was a Trevor Belmont show, and we just follow him around. It didn't have anything to do with the events in Castlevania, but just his further adventures. Or before a prequel, I am invested in that character and the voice actor, Richard Armitage, who gave him life. I mean, you can't get much better than that. So that's why I'm singing the praises as loudly as I am.
Yes, and is it Sypha?
Stipe, yes.
Yeah, Trevor and Sypha. I mean, there are windows of time in this built into the series where they could be going off and have all kinds of adventures. And I agree with you. I would watch a series about those too because they are so well drawn. They have a natural charisma. Alucard is a part of their triumvirate for a while, and that I thought played out very well. I would watch a series of adventures with the three of them.
Mm-hmm.
There are several characters where you could break them off and give them their own show. There's the four I'll call them vampire queens that kind of form their own alliance, and I would watch a show about them, and they could make a show about them, and it wouldn't have to have anything to do with what's in here.
Right.
I did find it interesting that when it came to the religious side of this, that pretty much most of the characters were just titles. You had like the bishop and the judge, and when they listed them in the credits, it's like, well, these folks weren't so much characters as they were titles, which I found appropriate because religion plays a role in the subtext of the story, and there's a lot going on here in the occult versus faith versus some of the well-documented sins of the church, shall we say, and some of the history that can be a bit cringeworthy when you go back through it. And this show doesn't back away from putting a lot of that up front. It's like these folks are basically the good guys to some extent, but are they in all circumstances? Did they make the right choices a lot of the time? There are people tried as witches where things are quite questionable. Some of those religious, some of them are just outright antagonists. They end up working against the good guys and actually making things worse. That said, it's not as black and white as that. There are some characters of faith who are very strong and very much on the side of what you would think of as good and right. And there are some villains who have some humanity to them. And, since this is a story in progress, there are a couple of people I'm kind of rooting for to kind of find their humanity and actually turn around. Their story is still going on. But even though they're presented as villains, I'm kind of hoping that they're going to kind of repent and find their way back to something that is a more positive force as opposed to a negative force. There's just so much here. We could go down so many paths to kind of unravel it all and get so deep into it, but there's just so much more than I expected when I was going in, and that's exciting for me. I haven't seen the Dracula mythos explored to this extent for a very long time.
Yes, and let's take a moment to tie this series in for our gamer audience here, to tie this into that. So basically, the first two seasons of this series adapt the 1983 Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, and they follow Trevor Belmont, Alucard, and Sypha as they defend the nation of Wallachia from Dracula and his minions. So it pretty much really plays almost verbatim for the beats with regards to the video game and this series, this anime series. I also want to say that the Castlevania 3 video game was originally produced for Nintendo back in 1989.
This goes back a long way.
By Konami in 1989 in Japan, and it reached North America in 1990. So, this goes back, and that was Castlevania 3. Okay, so when you go to Castlevania, the first release was September 26th of 1986, and also developed by Konami.
What would that have been on a PC? Well,
It was originally released on the PlayStation. Well, let me see. No, I take that back. It was originally produced for the Nintendo Family Computer Disk System. So yeah, it
holy
would have been.
smokes.
Yeah, it would have right. It would have been the disc cards, and then it had side-scrolling action platformers. It was crazy, and then
So
the
probably
next,
5.25-inch discs, I would guess.
right.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
then there was the Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which was the second entry into this, and that was that was back in 1997. There were a bunch of other like spin-off type. Here's the timeline. So Castlevania, Vampire Killer, Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, that was 1987. Haunted Castle, 1988. Castlevania The Adventure, 1989, along with Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse. And then you had a sequel to the Castlevania 2, which was released on Super Nintendo, called Belmont's Revenge. And then a whole slew of other ones that span. I mean, there's like dozens of video games that were produced in this series, starting in 1986 up until present day. And let me bring that into the discussion. So right now, there is a new release, well, semi-new. It's been out 10 years, but it was re-released recently. It's called Castlevania Lord of Shadows, and it is an awesome game. I'm playing it. I'm not the gamer that I once was. You know, I started off gaming with Atari 2600, so that I'm telling my age, and I'm proud of it.
Same.
And that is, you know, something that, you know, a lot of the newer, the younger gamers can appreciate, but they don't know what it was kind of like. So, you know, video games came out when we were kids, teenagers, you know, tweenagers and teenagers at age. And so then once we became adults and got through college, then it was like, okay, video games took a back seat because we had to deal with the real world and we had families and stuff like that. And so there was a whole section of time that, you know, video games weren't a thing with us. We were pursuing our dreams and doing and raising our families and other things. And I'm just now getting back into video games these past few, you know, 3-4 years, you know, slowly but surely. So just take that into consideration when we're talking about these things, that's our perspective from where we came into this.
I may have a somewhat closer perspective. I don't think I was never really, it just depends on what you're talking about. I wouldn't call myself a gamer by any means. However, my best friend worked for Origin Games. He worked on a couple of the Wing Commander series, which is now historically considered among some of the best games ever. And so he's always been very much a gamer. And so I've kind of, I guess, through osmosis of following what was his career for a while, and now it's just his continued enthusiastic interest. I've never entirely gotten out of touch with what's going on, but I don't play a whole lot myself. I play World of Warcraft a lot. That's really pretty much my game. But the Castlevania games, for whatever reason, no one ever said, hey, if you love Dracula, you need to check these out. That was never something anyone ever presented to me. In Castlevania, I'm like, sounds kind of Dracula-like, but I gotta admit, I didn't much care. I didn't quite make the connection that it was going to be as steeped in lore as it is. And I want to add, when you're watching the show, there are certain moments where you'll see like one of Dracula's minions, and it can almost kind of click. Oh, I'll bet this guy was a boss. I'll bet when you play the video game, you got to this level, and this is a representation of something from the video game. There were, I can't say there were never any moments like that, because there were, and that's okay. But I will say I never felt like the video game layout overrode the good storytelling, because I think when you're adapting something to tell a more standard story, I guess what I'm trying to say is they didn't let the video game play override the necessities of adapting it for anime. It's a good anime first, and it happens to be adapted from a video game second, which is how it should play. But there were moments where I went, oh, this character looks an awful lot like something you would fight in a video game, and that was all right. In fact, that was true of some of the protagonists as well. But they made them all characters, so that was good.
Yes, I agree. And just to give you guys a little bit more trivia, since we're talking about things, this series was originally planned as an anime film and developed by producer, please forgive me if I'm butchering his name, but Kevin Colday, and his company, Project 51. Well, Colday had a contract for a script with the writer Warren Ellis back in 2007. Okay. The project entered development hell until about 2015. So they just could not get this thing off the ground until about 2015. And then an Adi Shankar boarded the project, and it was picked up by Netflix. So Powerhouse Animation Studios joined the production team, and it started production at that point. So then, just so you'll know, going into this, if you haven't seen the trailer for the series, we have mentioned that this is an anime. So it has the art style that is heavily influenced by Japanese anime stylings.
I just got to jump in a second, dude. Sometimes, we would take a break and I would pause the TV because someone had to go to the bathroom, or it doesn't matter why, but the individual cells are so gorgeous. Mm-hmm. It's such a wonderful looking show. They put the time and the effort into making sure that this show looks great, as well as telling a good story. And that's, it's not motion picture animation. It's definitely not 24 frames a second, but I mean, there are some individual frames that you want to take and put up on your wall because they're just that good looking and they're just that detailed. A lot of things happen in the forest, and the wood grain is just exquisitely drawn. The castle architecture looks incredible. There's some supernatural, let's say, kind of Doctor Strange type imagery in some of it that just looks amazing. It looks appropriately trippy when it needs to look trippy.
Right.
And so yeah, I just wanted to say, if you're an animation fan and you're looking for some really neat, just individual cells, there's some wonderful stuff to see here.
Yes, and speaking of that, Ayami Kojima's artwork from the Castlevania Symphony of the Night game, the production team, including the staff members who worked in the Japanese anime industry, were basically heavily involved in this. So that speaks to what RJ was just saying and why the animation was so beautiful with this particular series. So that just is another layer on top of the writing, on top of the voice acting, on top of the source material from the video games that layered into why this is such a tremendously recommended show from both of us for you guys. So if you are familiar with the video games, know that a lot of the production team from the Castlevania Symphony of the Night video game was involved heavily in the creation and animation for this series. Yeah. And
it doesn't feel like a cash grab. I mean, the fact that Warren Ellis has had the rights for a very long time, he's waited for it. I don't know. I know nothing about the behind the scenes production. This is just based on what I watched. It feels like a labor of love. That's not to say that they weren't unaware of the commercial aspects, and they knew that there was a good chance this was going to make money. Obviously they did, but they got the right team that was invested. That's the feeling you get when you watch it. These were people who enjoyed what they're doing, I think, pretty much at every level, because the voice casting they nail it too. So
Absolutely. And I just want you to know that I want to go into the next segment with regards to talking about the characters themselves.
yeah, okay.
But enough cannot be said on this anime. Now, this is a little sneak peek into a show that you'll probably have coming later on. But so this particular anime is in my top 10. It's actually my top 5 of best animated or anime style television movies or series of all time. So that's just going to show you how much I love this. Okay, so that being said, let's talk a little bit more about the actual characters. Everyone knows who Dracula is. They know all of that. But one of the things that, and I don't think that this is a spoiler, as this is going to take place in like the first 30 minutes of the first episode.
I know where you're going. I agree. Yeah.
Basically, the humans in the village of Wallachia, the community, they decide that Dracula's human wife, who is a scientist, she's not a witch, she uses science, which in this world, it's a long forgotten art. So science is something that, people had years ago, but it was forgotten, and now it's very much akin to witchcraft and the occult. But she was a scientist. First of all, she's female during this time period, which that in and of itself, with someone being a female and being outspoken or being a doctor or a scientist, was just like unheard of and very unladylike, especially with the pious nature of this society. And things that they could not explain that weren't tied to their religious dogma was immediately branded as witchcraft. And as we know, it's like taking a bottle of aspirin or ibuprofen back to the 1600s and administering it to somebody. Some religious zealot is going to call it witchcraft. And we all know that it is not witchcraft. It is science. You can take chemicals and make this. There's nothing mystical about it. But the town is full of religious zealots led by the bishop, who is basically, they want to get rid of Dracula. Unbeknownst to them, Lisa Tepish, Dracula's wife, has come into his life and explored science with him and has actually asked him to travel abroad so that he can get a better understanding by living amongst the humans, so that he can be more sympathetic and empathic to who they are. Meanwhile, the humans are screwing everything up by wanting to pursue Dracula, and they come to his castle. His wife is there, and she has been helping people in the village who've had problems, much like I was talking about, administering a drug to them to help them with their pains and illnesses and things of that nature. Well, they come to his castle. They decide that she is practicing witchcraft, and they take her to the town square and burn her at a stake. And Dracula comes back to this, and he's like, I tried. You buttholes, you've incurred my wrath. Get your affairs in order. You got a year to do it, and then I'm laying waste to all of you. And that's basically what he said, and that's what happened. And
so let me jump in here real quick, because I want to give my perspective as the guy who came in with the chip on his shoulder. So first couple of minutes, we established that this woman is going to go and talk to Dracula and try to win him over. I was immediately like, what? Okay, this isn't. I didn't think that was going to work, and I think it took maybe 3 minutes to see a little bit of dialogue for them to convince me that not only would Dracula not kill this woman, but become infatuated with her. And I totally bought into the fact that he took her for not as a bride, because that means something different.
Right.
When you talk
Right.
about Dracula and his minions. He
Right.
took her as his wife, as his equal, as someone he was going to teach. They completely sold me on that. I mean, I've never seen. I mean, right off the bat, we're trying something a little bit different. We're trying something a little bit daring, and they sold me on it, even though I was doubtful that they could sell me on it. So then, by the time we find out that she's going to get burnt as a witch, I'm invested and I understand where Dracula's coming from. So the other thing I'll go a little bit further. I still don't think this is a spoiler. You kind of have indicated Dracula's plan is to basically destroy all of humanity. And that's one of those things that really also goes against. I don't like stories about vampires trying to take over the world or destroy the world, because to me, it's smarter for vampires to lay low and kind of take their little piece of territory and be happy with that, because the moment they try to get higher ambitions, humanity is going to join forces and they're going to get conquered and they're going to get destroyed. That's just what makes sense to me. I don't want to get too far down this, but Anne Rice's Queen of the Damned kind of played with that idea already, and it came to exactly the same conclusion. I think Dracula's smarter than that. However, what I liked is when Dracula pulls his forces together, his generals and his minions are like, okay, we gotta do something about this Dracula guy here, because he's gonna get us all killed. There's just no way. So I like the fact that you're not waiting very long before they acknowledge, hey, Dracula's plan is insane. He's in mourning. He's gone a little crazy. He's still all powerful, but we need to do something about it, because this is not a really good plan. I love the fact that they got there, and then the story proceeds accordingly. So that's really probably about as far as I want to take it as far as the storyline goes. But my point is, they hit two things that I don't like, and they sold me on both of those things. And I was like, okay, I'm down. Wow, they addressed it. They did it in a way that I bought into it. And yeah, for this old jaded Dracula fan, they did two daring things that I did not think I would like, and they managed to make it work.
This concludes the Two Towers Talk Show, Episode 8, Part 1, Castlevania. Please join us for Part 2, Episode 9 of Castlevania. Thank you. The Two Towers Talk Show is a network partner and partially sponsored by Nerddom United, a company whose goal is to create and provide materials for nerds around the world. They support all things nerdy, from anime, comics, gaming, manga, movies, TV, and more. Nerddom United's goal is to provide a platform for nerds to be involved with what they love and to create a safe space for nerds to passionately pursue and grow their creative endeavors. Be sure to check them out on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks. The Two Towers Talk Show is sponsored in part by Showtime Cinema in Mooresville, Indiana. Their friendly staff is always willing to go the extra mile to make your movie-going experience an enjoyable and memorable one. Enjoy the comfort of their new cushioned seating in their spacious auditoriums, and while you're there, be sure to stop by the concession stand and purchase some popcorn where real butter topping is an option. They're located at 300 South Bridge Street in Mooresville, Indiana. We hope to see you at the movies.